Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Frank Mularcik, and in this video we're going to be talking about my spreadsheet that I use to track my dividend investing portfolio, and we're just going to be going over some of the basic features that it has and sort of just how I calculate certain values and at least my methodologies for getting some of the information that I like to look at. And I'm going to make a couple of these videos over the next few weeks or few months about this. I made a few videos more focused on this about a year ago, towards the beginning of my channel. I haven't talked about it as much recently, so there's definitely been things that have changed, and hopefully I can be a little bit more in-depth in these videos as well and give you guys a better understanding of how you might be able to do this for yourself. So we're just going to look at my spreadsheet here that I have for my portfolio, and it's pretty basic in what it does, and the basic goal is just to provide me with an overall view of my portfolio, and then I can also look at some specific details as well and look at how some things are going over time as well to try to track my progress. So right down here is sort of where I have a summary of things, different numbers that I want to pay attention to, I guess. And then up here is where I sort of have all my positions listed out with some specific information about that. So the first thing we have up here is sort of the headings of what each of these columns is going to represent. So this heading, I guess, actually I didn't even name it. It's the ticker symbol. Sorry, I'm on caps lock. So this column, or this heading here, is the ticker symbol. And so these are just all the ticker symbols of the companies I own in my dividend portfolio. And then I just kind of made up one here for cash, which isn't too important, but I will talk about that a little bit later. And then we just have a bunch of other headings with a bunch of other information about the company, and I'm going to talk about some of those right now. So the next one is the company name, and how we determine the company name is just by this Google Finance function. And you pass it, the ticker symbol basically, and then this name parameter, and it will give you the name back of the company. So the ticker symbol is in column A2, and then the company name will be generated in this cell. And if you guys don't know, basically how you can put a formula down into multiple cells is, say we didn't have these formulas here for these names, but we had this one here. And basically, if we want to copy the same formula down to all these cells, but instead of looking at cell A2 for these, we want to look at cell A3 for Carnival, and then cell A4 for Amcor. What we can do is we can just go to this right corner here and drag that formula down, and that lets us basically copy those formulas down. But then when we look at Carnival here, we're looking at cell A3, so it basically increments those cell references when you drag it down, and then it can do a similar thing dragging across. But in most of the cases for the formulas I use in my spreadsheet, I drag them down as opposed to across the spreadsheet. And also, before I get any further, I do want to sort of address what these alternating color thing is here. So it's a really nice feature, and it just kind of lets you view different things line by line. I just think it's visually easier to see some of this stuff when you put these alternating color formats on here. So what you can do is if you just like select some cells, and then if I think it's under formatting, and then alternating colors, basically you can add different colors. And so for example here, basically for all the cells in the range of B1 to P26 in my spreadsheet, which is all the way over to about here, we have them blue, and the header is a little bit darker blue, and then the color 1 is just white, and then color 2 we have a light blue, and that just kind of makes it easy to see each row individually, but also see them all together at the same time, I guess, if that makes sense. And you can change the colors here if you want, and add a footer color, for example, but we're not going to do that. And basically for me, what this means in my spreadsheet is all the ones that are yellow, these are things you have to input on your own. So the ticker symbol, and there's really not that many. The ticker symbol, the frequency of the dividend, basically that means like how many times you're going to pay that dividend per year. So in the case of everything in my portfolio, it's 4 times, but there are some monthly payers, so in that case it would be 12. And then the years of increasing dividends, I haven't really found a good way to, pull that value dynamically either yet. So I could look into that maybe in the future a little bit more, but I am just entering that on my own for the moment. And then pretty much everything else in blue will just auto-populate either based on formulas or based on some Python scripts I have that do run, about every day, and they run and just update some of these values. So, for example, in the dividend column here, these are not, any formulas, but I also don't have to enter these manually because my Python script is doing that for me. So going back here, we got the company name, and then for the sector, what I did is I created basically a filter. I forget the specific name for what it's called, but we can look in here, and it should be in one of these. It's probably in data, and I think it's maybe it's called data validation here. So if you choose that, you can basically list out the criteria or the possible items. So I just listed out all the sectors here, and then I also listed out ETF index fund, which I don't really have any of those in my portfolio at this point, but that's something you can basically just list out all the sectors you want, or if you don't want to do sectors, you want to do some type of other choice, then you can just list out all the choices you want. And then, for the next row, then it will, give you this drop down menu, and you can choose, whatever it's going to be. And that will just allow you to easily look at all your, companies based on their sector. So I guess this sector column really is something you have to enter manually as well. So that should really be shaded yellow, but I guess that's my fault. Then the next one is shares here, and this one is a little bit of a complicated transaction or complicated formula, I guess, that I'm using to input the shares and the number of shares, and it's kind of focused on this transactions tab as well. So I'm gonna actually wait until one of the next videos I make on this spreadsheet to talk about the shares, because I think it's a little bit more complicated and it just takes a lot longer to explain. And then the next one here is just price. That's also just a simple Google Finance call, which is just use the price as the parameter, and you pass the ticker symbol as well. And also, I forgot to mention, I have this is blank function, and I'm basically, checking if the ticker symbol is blank. And I guess there's really not much point to it, but my thinking initially was I could copy this formula down, all these formulas down to a whole bunch of cells, and then just add in new ticker symbols as I went. But that's not really the best strategy. So this is blank thing isn't really that necessary, but just to demonstrate what it does, basically if I remove the ticker symbol of ExxonMobil, all these things are just going to disappear, whereas if I left them, they would maybe just give like some sort of error because there's no like Google Finance call for a blank ticker symbol. So since I did not, since I'm not really using that is blank method, it's not that important, but I thought it was something interesting that I figured out how to do. But the next thing here is just change. So that's just the amount in dollars the stock price has changed on the day. And it's just a simple Google Finance call again with the change parameter. And then this one basically is the equity change. So it's actually the amount of value that my portfolio is changing based on this position. So in the case of ExxonMobil, it looks like Friday was a pretty bad day for it. It was down about $2.92, the stock price. But since I only own 0.09 shares at the moment, the value of my portfolio really only went down 25 cents because of that. So basically all that is the day change, which is in F2, and I'm multiplying that by the number of shares, which is in D2. So that's pretty simple. Then the Sparkline formula, this just kind of gives me a quick view of how the stock has been doing the last year. Then it turns it red or green if the price today is higher or lower than it was a year ago. This formula is a little bit complicated, so I will put this in the comment section down below if you guys do want to just kind of copy it. But basically what it's doing is it's basically getting a list of prices every day, every week from today going back a year ago with this Google Finance call right here. So that's basically giving a list of those price data. And then over here, this is just kind of some parameters that dictate whether or not this line is going to be red or green. So basically, this first part is setting the line width to 1. You can set it to something larger, but in that case, it doesn't look that good, as you can see. But basically, it sets the line width to 1, and then it sets the color to some value here. So it's basically saying if the price today is greater than the price 365 days ago, then we want to make it green. And if it's not greater, then that means it's less than, so we want to make it red. So that's basically what that means. And then this next column, I guess this one is something I enter manually as well, but it kind of goes along with the following column as well. So these next two columns basically show the annual dividend that the company is going to pay, or is projected to pay at least, based on the most recent dividend. So it's kind of a forward looking amount. So this value right here is basically input from a Python script I have that I run every single day at around 10 p.m. at night. And that just runs and updates these values. And then what happens after that is that it basically compares these values that are updated dynamically every day to these manual values that I have to input on my own. And if this new value is greater, then it turns green here, and it tells us what the change percentage was. So you can see we got some dividend increases this month, which I will be going over in depth in my next dividend update video for November, which should be coming out in about a week or two. But this just allows me to get a visual of which companies are increasing their dividends and by how much. And then this next column over here is just the dividend yield. And basically what that is that's just the amount of dividends they're paying out annually divided by the stock price. So we're just it's just a simple formula, which is J2 divided by E2. So J2 is the annual dividend, and then E2 is the stock price. If we look over here, E2 is the stock price. So that's just going to give us the dividend yield. And then the yield on cost is a little bit similar to the dividend yield, except what it is looking at is actually the dividend yield at the time that you bought the company, or not even the dividend yield at the time you bought the company. It's looking at the current dividend yield based on your cost basis, essentially. So there's two ways that the yield on cost can be different from the current dividend yield. The first way, which is going to happen most often, is that the stock price is changing. So if I bought a company for $10 per share and they pay a $1 per year dividend, that's a 10% dividend yield. But if a year later the stock price is at $20 per share and they're still paying that $1 per share dividend, well, that's 1 divided by 20, which is only a 5% dividend yield. So that means your yield on cost is still going to be 10% because you bought the company at $10 per share and they're currently paying $1 per share. But the dividend yield would be 20% because that's the current yield. And then another way the yield on cost can change is if the company actually changes the amount of the dividend. So if the company is $10 per share initially, and then they are paying $1 per share when you bought them, and then maybe a year later they're still trading at $10 per share, but they actually increase the dividend to $1.50. Well, in that case, the dividend yield would be 15% at that point, and your yield on cost would also be 15%. And these two factors can obviously go hand in hand, and both affect the yield on cost. So I think that's just an interesting metric. I'm not going to talk about it as much here, but basically in another one of these tabs, I calculate my average cost. So then basically I just do the current dividend divided by that average cost, essentially. And then the annual dividend paid, that just means like how much am I going to receive in dividends from this company over the next year. And that essentially is just the amount of dividends they're paying per share times the number of shares I have. And then this equity, that's just how much my position is worth, how much I currently have invested in this company. That's just a simple formula as well, which is just the number of shares I have, which is in D2 times the current price of each share, which is in E2. So that's pretty simple as well. And then this final column here that we're going to talk about today is the total, allocation percentage of my portfolio. And that is basically just the equity amount divided by the total value of my portfolio. So what I have down here is, I have a total down here in this bottom row, which is basically the total value of my portfolio. So in the percentage column, I'm basically taking, the current value of that one position, and I'm dividing it by the total value of the portfolio. So O2 is the current value of my first position in ExxonMobil, and then O26 is the total value of the portfolio. And another thing, the last thing I want to talk about is these dollar signs in front of the O and 26. And basically what that does is that says this value, this cell that we're referencing to is going to be like a constant. And so what that does is when we drag this formula down, it does not change the reference to that cell. So in every single one of these cells, it's referencing O26 in the number that we're dividing by. So it's O15 divided by O26, O16 divided by O26. And if we actually got rid of these dollar signs, you would see it wouldn't really work because it would be referencing, values that weren't there if we drag it down here. So, it's giving divide by 0 errors because now it's doing O6 divided by O30. And if we look down, O30 down here, there's really nothing in that cell, so it can't divide by anything. So that's sort of what that formatting is, which basically tells Google Sheets that if I extend this formula to other cells, I don't want to alter the row or column number of this particular cell that I'm referencing. So that's a super helpful little piece of formatting that can help with some specific division or multiplication or just general formulas that you're trying to do in general with Google Sheets. So let me know if you guys do have any questions about anything I went over in this video. It was definitely a little bit longer than I wanted it to be, and I actually didn't even cover as much of the spreadsheet as I wanted it to, but I really don't want it to drag on for 20 or 30 minutes, so I'll just leave it there. And in the next video, I'll be going over, the remaining columns to the right in that main page, and then I'll also be trying to talk about, the summary that I have at the bottom left there, and then I also want to talk about, some of the graphs I have shown and how to, make those. So stay tuned for the next video. Expect that one in a week or two on some more features in the spreadsheet, and I will see you guys in the next one.